Hey everybody, we're going to talk about the book project and specifically focus on text and bringing in images and working with your background of your book. So we've got our layout set up. I have a sample book that I'm working on here. I've already worked with adding in the title and the author, and I brought the author's photo in. The book is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. So I just want to remind everybody that every time you work with text or images, getting used to working with layers is very important. So over here on the right-hand tab, I'm going to pop out that layer window, and you can see that for everything that we've done, we have a layer that's been added. Those layers can be made visible, or you can hide them. And they stack on top of each other, and you can click, hold down, and slide them around. So the more layers that you get going, the more it's going to be important to organize those. But again, you can hide them as you go if it starts to become overwhelming. And I've got my author photo, and even the background can be hidden. And we can go ahead and unlock that background layer to make everything a little bit easier. Okay. So you're going to need the text of the title, which should be big and bold on the screen or on the front of your book cover. It's important to always give the author credit. The name of the book needs to run vertically down the spine. We can go ahead and do that now. Now I want to go ahead and also draw your attention to the layers yet again, so that when I add a text layer, we're going to do the author's name and the name of the book. Now notice how I grab the edge of the text, I pull that around. There is a vertical text tool, but I ask you not to use that, because if you look at the sides of books, and actually you can have it go this way, you're going to notice that the text always runs top to bottom vertically. So I really caution against, if you look at the text tool, there is a vertical type text tool. Occasionally I'll have a project turned in with that, but that becomes really hard to read. You got to imagine if somebody's visiting a bookshop, they're looking for a book, it needs to be very, very legible. That's the most important thing that I can say about working with text, is not just the front and the back, but the spine needs to be very easy to read, because if somebody is looking through hundreds of books, they're not going to have time to try to decipher text that's hard to read and getting lost in a jumble of graphics. So keep that in mind. Keep it short, simple, and easy to read. Don't cram in too much information, I guess is an easy way to saying that. Okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about is just adding more text, building more layers in there. We're going to select the text tool. I'm going to move that into my window. Now this is going to be the back section of the book jacket. If I click and I drag and I hold that down, you can see it gives me what looks like a selection area. And that's going to keep the text within that bounding box. Okay, so if I click, hold down, and drag, and lift that up, it gives me some generic text and to go in there. Now I've already preloaded the copy and paste information about the book. So I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to paste that in, and we have a quick summary of the book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is of course a real book. And I pulled this information off the web, which you are allowed to do for this project. Okay, if the text isn't exactly the way you want it, it's selected. You can go back up to the top of the screen and change the point size of the text. I think 18 16 or 18 looked the best for this. And then it's selected. You can move that around wherever you might want it. Maybe that goes up at the top, and then you add in some more praise quotes down here. You can work in the author bio. You can work in information about if a book that if you're working with a classic book and it's got an anniversary coming up, or it's in a third or fourth or fifth reprinting, you can add that information. So I actually encourage you to go to the bookstore, just look around at books, pick a few up, and find out the ways that new books are being, or republished books are being marketed. Look at the sorts of things that are on there. I don't give you a really specific list of what needs to be on there because I want you to give you some freedom, okay? So I do obviously want the title. I think some sort of summary would be good. Beyond that, you can include the author's bio, praise quotes, and things like that, okay? So the next thing that we want to do is we want to add in a graphic for the front cover. I've already preloaded an image here that I'm going to be working with. This is an illustration from the book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Ralph Steadman is the artist. We've selected that. Not going to cover the specifics of selecting and cutting and pasting. You should know that by now. So I've pre-selected it. We're going to go to Edit. We're going to cut this guy out. We're going to add him into my book jacket cover. I'm going to go Edit, Paste. And we have our little illustration. And this guy is going to go, Dr. Gonzo is going to go on our front cover here. I can grab that edge, that bounding box edge, and enlarge that. And get that the way we want it. Okay. Now we do have a little bit of an issue. This is going to be a common problem. The illustration overruns the author's name. In my case, you don't want that. You want your text to be very legible. In my case, I'm going to just go to that layer. I'm going to just move the author's name down a little bit. I'm going to go back to the layer with my original illustration. There he is, right there. And I'm going to go in with my eraser tool. And I'm just going to erase some of those lines down at the bottom that I really don't need, that are conflicting with the author's name. So keep that in mind. Your text should not be competing with any other part of your book. Okay. Now I've also began my process with something we've talked about with adding a gradient in the background. Let's say that I want to actually bring in something else and I'm not satisfied with the gradient. I want to bring some texture into this project. So what I'm going to do, I found a grungy paper texture online. There are many, many resources for that, public domain images that you can find. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this, okay? But you can see there's nothing special about it. It's just literally like old newsprint. This looks like a scanned, old, roughed up piece of paper. And this is, there's lots of examples of these all over the net, or you can scan in your own drawing paper or newsprint. And it's going to give you a texture that just flat computer graphics are not going to give you. So I'm going to take this. I'm actually going to drag it in. So it's way too small. But that's okay. I'm going to grab that edge and enlarge it. Now normally it's a little bit of a dangerous thing to be enlarging JPEGs, especially ones pulled off the web, because you're going to deal with a lot of blurring. But we can get away with a little bit of that because the background doesn't need to be as sharp as, say, the author's photo or the illustration. It's just the background texture, so it's not as big of a deal. So yeah, we've got that in place now. I can go up to, let's still make sure that we're on that particular layer. We are, okay. Now you can see my textured layer. I'm going to go in, maybe adjust the brightness and contrast a little bit. can pull that down a little bit if I want to bring out some of those paper textures. It's really just up to you. There's no specific set of rules about what you should do. But it's now we have a nice texture that's in there. Helps it pop a little bit. Now, if we want to tint our paper, that's another thing that you can do very, very easily. And what you can do is we can select that layer, and there's all sorts of really awesome transparency settings in Photoshop. So if you go up, if you can see where my mouse is hovering over where it says normal over on my layer tab, if I drop that down, I've got what's called blending modes. And look at this, as I scroll over that, it's giving me all sorts of options. Some work really well, some don't work well at all. It's giving me previews. Okay, now what's happening here is it's taking my paper layer and it's doing a blend with the layer that's underneath it. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than just simply dropping the opacity, which would just make it, you know, a little bit more transparent. In this case, it's taking out the light or the dark area, but it's leaving those dark textures. I actually really like the color burn there. So let's say, depends on just what you like, you know, what parts you want to pop out, how visible you want everything to be. Soft light's working pretty well, as is hard light. Okay. Color burn looks nice, but we're starting to lose our text a little bit, right? So keep those sorts of things in mind as you make your decisions. You don't want that text to be compromised, sort of like the lighten effect here. So now, again, if I go to my layers and I hide that paper texture, you can see the difference. So now the gradient, the blue-purple wash, is now sort of just a light color texture. If I take that away, we're back to our typical typical paper color that we brought in. So it's just sort of bringing a nice subtle tint, nothing overwhelming, but just a little bit of a nice element of color wash is what I would call that. So keep that in mind. That's a good place to stop this discussion. But one other thing I will say, if you wanted to continue this a little bit further, you really wanted to add more colors in, you do have the option of adding a new layer, a blank layer. So if I hover my mouse over create a new layer and I'm on my paper layer, it's automatically going to make a blank layer here. You can see it's called layer 4. That layer is on top of the paper layer. Now I can go in and go to fill. Let's try color here. Let's pull in a darker red. And I have no idea how this is gonna look, but we're gonna experiment a little bit. So now I can do the opposite of what I just discussed. I can take my red layer, I can go in and now play around with those blending modes, and I'm getting a much different effect, very different look for the book in general. So the blue and the red are fighting with each other a little bit, but you get the idea. That's sort of interesting with the blue and the orange. Okay, so the more you play around with it, there's endless possibilities once you get into this. It's a lot of fun. I like playing around with textures and blending and colors. Now, one thing I will also say to conclude here is that the author photo of Hunter over here is on the top layer. Okay, so let's find where Hunter is. There he is. He's up in the corner. If I take that layer and I drag it down, let's keep going down. Let's put Hunter underneath the red layer. Okay, now look what that's done. That's taken his image, it's put it under the red layer, but of course that transparency setting is still there, so it's taken his image and tinted it red. Sort of an interesting effect. Doesn't make a huge difference within the context of the whole project, But it is interesting to play around with color schemes, and I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to think about the color scheme that you're working with. Is the overall scheme of your book jacket warm colors, cool colors, contrasting colors, primary colors, that sort of thing. Keep that in mind. I do have an example here that I've shown before, a student example of a student who did Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And they took the author's photo and they did exactly what I just did. Okay, they added a yellow tint to Philip K. Dick's photo. So, that obviously was a black and white image. He just did a transparency layer on top, tinted that yellow, and that fits within the overall color scheme of his project, the blue and the yellow together. Okay, so I do want you to think about that, and how does the color scheme that you choose fit with the mood of the book? Okay, so if I was to go with this really garish orange and blue theme, it would actually fit with the mood pretty well. Las Vegas, garish, over-the-top atmosphere, drug-addled book that this is, surrealism. It would all fit together really, really well with the project. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind if you're doing a Jane Austen book versus something like Fear and Loathing, very different themes. So how would the mood of the color scheme that you pick sell that book and get across to the viewer what the book may be about if they know nothing about it and it's something that's strange to them? Okay, so have fun and let me see your projects. I'm excited to see what you come up with.